It may seem unbelievable that Israel has monetarily and politically supported Hamas, yet it is undeniably true. Although seemingly nonsensical at first, once investigated, it becomes very clear why Israel planted the seeds and provided the fertilizer, allowing Hamas to grow. The dominant representative of the Palestinian people prior to Hamas was the PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization. The PLO utilized guerrilla warfare, terrorism, and armed civil resistance to rebuke the state of Israel and deny the Israeli state legitimacy. However, due to American support, it became increasingly clear that political negotiations would see the interests of the Palestinians brought to fruition rather than armed conflict. The secular nationalist foundation of the PLO allowed it to adapt its approach to dealing with the Israeli state and bargaining on behalf of the Palestinians. The organization's founding charter, although included multiple exceptions regarding violent resistance, emphasizes its secular nature. Quote, "The Palestinian people believe in the principles of justice, freedom, sovereignty, self-determination, human dignity, and in the right of all peoples to exercise them." End quote. The charter also clarifies the organization's stance on religions competing with Islam. Quote, "The Jews who had normally resided in Palestine until the beginning of the Zionist invasion will be considered Palestinians." End quote. Yasser Arafat, the secular leader of the PLO, in his Nobel Prize lecture, described the coexistence between the Abrahamic religions. Quote, "The same applies to the question of Jerusalem, the spiritual haven for Muslims, Christians, and Jews. It is the city of cities for Palestinians, and where Jewish holy places are on an equal footing with Islamic and Christian holy places. So let us make it a world beacon for spiritual harmony, the radiance of civilization and religious heritage for all humanity." End quote. As the PLO shifted away from its armed resistance roots, focusing more on diplomacy, it began to garner international recognition and legitimacy. By 1974, the United Nations officially granted non-state observer status, allowing the PLO to participate in all assembly sessions as well as in other UN platforms. Following recognition from the UN, the Soviet Union granted the PLO legitimacy. Just under a decade and a half later, to cement legitimacy within the international community, the PLO produced the Palestinian Declaration of Independence. The declaration stated, quote, "Despite the historical injustice done to the Palestinian Arab people in its displacement and in being deprived of the right to self-determination following the adoption of General Assembly Resolution 181 of 1947, which partitioned Palestine into an Arab and a Jewish state, that resolution nevertheless continues to attach conditions of international legitimacy that guarantee the Palestinian Arab people the right to sovereignty and national independence." End quote. The statements put forth by the declaration achieved the PLO's goal of reaching international legitimacy. The UN acknowledged the Palestinian Declaration of Independence of November 1988 and replaced the designation Palestine Liberation Organization with Palestine in the United Nations system. Although the PLO did not have control over the territories of Gaza or the West Bank, as a state that denounced terrorism and accepted coexistence with Israel, it could now approach the negotiating table. The PLO's diplomatic shift and newfound legitimacy deeply disturbed the dominant political party of Israel, the Likud party. Seeking to undermine the PLO, the government of Israel employed divide and conquer tactics. According to the LA Times, quote, "Israeli governments encouraged formation of Palestinian forces that would serve as an alternative to the PLO-dominated factions," end quote. These alternative Palestinian forces eventually would center on the Muslim Brotherhood member Ahmed Yassin. American journalist Jonathan Schanzer writes in his 2008 book, Hamas v. Fatah, quote, By the late 1970s, the Israelis believed that they had found Fatah's Achilles heel. Fatah had become anxious over the growing influence of the Muslim Brotherhood in Gaza. End quote. He goes on to claim, quote, they made the ill-fated decision to permit the Brotherhood to operate with relatively little oversight. End quote. Yassin and his Israeli-funded networks transitioned into Hamas in the late 1980s. This is widely acknowledged in Israeli newspapers and openly acknowledged by senior Israeli government officials. Israeli military governor of Gaza during the early 1980s, Yitzhak Segev, was provided a budget by Israeli authorities and instructed to provide funding to the Palestinian Islamist movement. Yitzhak seems to reluctantly claim, quote, the Israeli government gave me a budget, and the military government gives to the mosques, end quote. Not even attempting to keep this divide and conquer strategy secret, Prime Minister Netanyahu urged his colleagues at a Likud party conference to fall in line, quote, anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state has to support bolstering Hamas and transferring money to Hamas. This is part of our strategy to isolate the Palestinians in Gaza from the Palestinians in the West Bank, end quote. Shlomo Brom, retired general and former deputy to Israel's national security advisor, believes that boosting the power of Hamas in splintering Gaza away from the West Bank allows Israel, particularly Netanyahu, to perpetually play the victim card, claiming that they have no partner for peace and Palestinians wish to wipe the only Jewish state off the face of the earth. Finally, both Josep Borrell, the EU foreign policy chief, and Professor Avner Cohen, former Israeli religious official, go as far to claim Hamas was Israel's creation. Given the ongoing war being waged in Gaza, how do pro-Israeli scholars rectify this obvious nail in the coffin of their ideology, which asserts Israel as the victim?